Ross knew something was wrong the moment she stepped into the marble foyer of the Kang estate and found 6-year-old Minyu standing frozen at the top of the staircase, staring down at a glass of untouched orange juice on the side table below, a glass that had no business being there. She had cleaned that hallway an hour ago. Nothing had been left behind. Her employer, the notoriously cold and untouchable Kang Jam, had warned her on her first day that his son's safety was the only thing that mattered in this house, and that anyone who failed to protect it would vanish from his life without explanation. Now, watching Minyu reach for the glass with a child's innocent curiosity, Ross felt her pulse spike. She crossed the room in 3 strides, knocked the glass from his small hand before it touched his lips, and watched the liquid hiss faintly against the marble, an impossible wrong sound for orange juice to make. Somewhere upstairs, a door clicked shut. Someone had been inside this house. Someone who wanted the Kang heir dead. And when Kang Jam learned what she had just done, everything about how he saw his son's maid was about to change forever. The scream that left Ross's throat wasn't loud. It was sharp, controlled, the kind of sound trained into a person who had spent years learning not to panic out loud even when her hands were shaking. She swept Minyu into her arms, putting her body between him and the stairs, and shouted for the head of security in a voice that cracked through the quiet house like a whip. By the time Kang Jam arrived, storming down the hallway in a suit that still smelled faintly of the boardroom he'd left 20 minutes early to check on a security alert he hadn't yet understood, the scene had already changed shape. His security chief, Mr. Yoon, was on his knees photographing the spilled liquid. 2 guards were sweeping the east wing. And in the middle of it all stood Ross, the maid he'd hired 3 months ago against his better judgment, the one his mother had warned him not to trust, the one he still couldn't quite read, holding his son like he was the only thing left in the world worth protecting. What happened? It wasn't a question. Kang Jam's voice never rose, not really. It simply hardened, the way steel hardens under pressure rather than heat. There was a glass on the side table that wasn't there an hour ago, Ross said, meeting his eyes without flinching, which almost no one in this house did. Minyu was about to drink it. It didn't sound right when it hit the floor. Mr. Yoon looked up grimly. Preliminary field test says there's something in it. We won't know what until the lab confirms, but it's not orange juice. Not anymore. Something moved behind Kang Jam's eyes. Not fear exactly, because men like him had trained fear out of their faces years ago, but something colder and older, the specific stillness of a man calculating who among the people he trusted might have just tried to kill his son. His gaze cut to Ross. You knocked it out of his hand, he said slowly, before you knew what it was. I didn't need to know what it was, Ross answered. I needed him not to drink it. For a long moment, Kang Jam simply looked at her, and Ross had the strange, uncomfortable sensation of being studied like a puzzle whose pieces refused to fit the picture he'd already drawn of her. He had hired her reluctantly, at his sister's insistence, after the last 3 nannies had quit or been quietly paid off by rival families trying to get close to his son. He'd expected her to last 2 weeks. She had lasted 3 months, and in that time he'd caught himself, more than once, watching the easy way she made Minyu laugh, a boy who hadn't laughed easily since his mother died, and wondering, with a discomfort he refused to name, what it would be like to be looked at the way she looked at his son. He didn't trust it. He didn't trust anyone who was kind for free. Take Minyu to the safe room, he told her, and something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Stay with him. Don't let anyone else in. Not staff, not family. No one but me. Ross nodded once and carried Minyu away, and Kang Jam watched her go with an expression his security chief had learned, over 11 years of loyal service, never to ask questions about. The safe room was windowless, soundproofed, and stocked with enough supplies to survive a siege, a relic of Kang Jam's father's paranoia, inherited along with the company and the enemies that came with it. Ross sat on the floor with Minyu curled against her side, his small hand fisted in the fabric of her sleeve, and hummed a lullaby her own mother used to sing in Lagos, half a world and a lifetime away from this cold Seoul mansion. Is my dad going to be okay? Minyu asked, voice muffled against her arm. Your dad is the toughest person I've ever met, Ross said, and meant it. He's going to be fine. We're going to be fine. You saved me, Minyu said, looking up at her with the unguarded trust only children still had left to give. Like a superhero. Ross smiled, though her chest ached with something complicated. She hadn't taken this job for the money, though the money mattered. Her younger brother's university fees back home didn't pay themselves, and the Kang family paid well enough to make that possible. She had taken it because after years of being underestimated, overlooked, and quietly pushed out of rooms, she'd earned the right to be in. There was something almost radical about a job where her only task was to be exactly as capable and attentive as she actually was, and be believed. She hadn't expected to fall into orbit around a man who looked at her like she might be a threat wearing a smile. The door beeped. Kang Jam entered alone, having changed out of his suit jacket, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a laptop tucked under one arm. He crouched to Minu's eye level first. Always his son first, Ross had noticed in every crisis, in every quiet, unguarded moment, and pressed a kiss to his hair. "Safe," he murmured in Korean. "Appa's here." Only once Minu had drifted into an exhausted sleep against a cushion did Kang Jam turn his attention to Ross, and his voice dropped low enough that it wouldn't wake his son. Lab confirmed it. A neurotoxin, slow-acting, designed to look like a seizure disorder. If he'd drunk even half that glass, we wouldn't have caught it until it was too late to reverse. Ross's stomach turned to ice. "Who would?" "That's what I intend to find out." His jaw was tight, his eyes distant in the particular way of a man mentally walking through a list of people he'd once called friends. Then, unexpectedly, his gaze sharpened back onto her. "Why did you know to check the sound of it hitting the floor?" The question caught her off guard. "I didn't consciously, I just knew orange juice doesn't sound like that." "That's not training. That's instinct." He studied her the way he might study a contract clause that didn't match the rest of the document. "Everyone in my employ is vetted, background checked, watched, and yet somehow, 3 months ago, my sister brought me a maid with no criminal record, no debts, no family ties to anyone in my industry, and today, that same maid is the only person in this house who reacted fast enough to save my son's life. You accusing me of something?" Ross's voice was quiet, but it had an edge now, the practiced calm of a woman who had spent her life being suspected simply for existing in rooms people didn't expect her in. "I'm saying it's convenient," Kang Jam said. "And I don't believe in convenient." "Then believe this," Ross said, standing, drawing herself up to her full height, refusing to shrink the way this house seemed to want everyone around him to shrink. "I have spent 3 months learning every inch of your son's routine because I love that little boy, not because I'm angling for anything from you. If you want to run another background check, run it. Put a camera in my room. Follow me to the market. I have nothing to hide from you, Mr. Kang, and I am tired, genuinely, exhausted, of men like you deciding a woman who looks like me must be after something simply because she's good at her job." For a long moment, Kang Jam said nothing. The silence stretched, taut and electric, neither of them backing down, and something shifted in the air between them that had nothing to do with poison or suspicion at all. "I'll have Mr. Yoon triple security around Minu," he finally said, voice quieter now. "And I'll need you to stay in the main house tonight, not the staff quarters, where I can reach you if something happens." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't an accusation anymore either. Sleep did not come easily that night. Ross lay awake in the guest wing, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of a house built to keep danger out and secrets in, replaying the sound of that glass hitting the floor. Around 2 a.m., unable to settle, she padded down to the kitchen for water and found Kang Jam already there, standing at the window in the dark, a glass of untouched whiskey sweating on the counter beside him, watching the security feed on his tablet with the exhausted intensity of a man who hadn't blinked in hours. "You should sleep," she said before she could stop herself. "So should you." He didn't turn around. "Yet here we both are." She hesitated, then crossed the kitchen and stood beside him, close enough to see the tablet's screen grainy footage of the east hallway, time-stamped from that afternoon, looping over and over. A shadow crossed the frame at the edge for less than a second. Blurred, unidentifiable. "Watch that 100 times," she said. 111. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, touched the corner of his mouth. "I keep thinking if I watch it enough times, it'll tell me something new." "Won't," Ross said gently. "But you will, eventually. You're not the kind of man who lets something like this go unanswered." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, in a way he hadn't allowed himself to before, not as a threat to assess, not as an employee to manage, but as a woman standing in his kitchen at 2 in the morning who had, without hesitation, put her body between his son and death. Why did you really take this job, Ross? His voice had lost its edge entirely. She considered lying. She considered the easy, professional answer. Instead, in the dark, exhausted honesty of the hour, she told him the truth about her brother, about Lagos, about the string of jobs in Seoul where she'd been told she was too much, too confident, too visible, and about the strange, quiet dignity of a house where her only job was to protect a little boy who needed protecting. Kang Jam listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said something that surprised them both. My son laughs more since you arrived than he has in 2 years. A pause. I noticed. I just didn't know what to do with noticing. Air between them thickened with something neither of them named. Ross's heartbeat picked up in a way that had nothing to do with fear of poisoners or hidden enemies. For one suspended moment, his hand lifted slightly from the counter, as if he might reach for her, and then his phone buzzed violently against the marble, shattering the moment entirely. He answered on the first ring. Ross watched his face change, the careful stillness cracking into something sharper, colder, more dangerous. That again, he said into the phone, voice flat, a pause. Certain it was her fingerprints on the file, Ross's stomach dropped. Kang Jam ended the call and turned to her slowly, and the warmth that had been building between them in the dark kitchen evaporated as if it had never existed at all. That was Mr. Yoon, he said. Security just finished reviewing the access logs from the pantry, where the poison was likely mixed into the juice. His eyes, when they met hers now, held something that hadn't been there a moment ago, a wall slamming shut. Your keycard accessed that pantry at 2:47 this afternoon, 14 minutes before Minyu found that glass. Batch 1 ends here. Ross swore she never went near that pantry, but the evidence says otherwise, and the man who had, for one fragile moment, started to trust her, is now looking at her like a stranger he let too close to his son. Who really accessed that pantry, and why does the truth of it threaten to unravel far more than just Ross's job? That's impossible, Ross said, and she heard her own voice come out steadier than she felt, because panic had never once solved a problem in her life and she wasn't about to let it start now. I was with Minyu at 2:47. We were in the garden. Ask him. Ask the gardener. Ask anyone. Keycards don't lie, Kang Jam said, but there was something in his voice now that wasn't quite conviction, more like a man forcing himself to believe the version of events that kept him safest from his own softening. People clone keycards, Mr. Kang. Ross stepped closer, refusing to be cowed by the sudden coldness radiating off him. Someone in this house wants your son dead and wants me blamed for it. Both, at the same time. That should terrify you more than my keycard number, because it means whoever did this is patient, methodical, and still inside these walls. Mr. Yoon arrived within minutes, tablet in hand, and pulled the garden's exterior camera footage without being asked. A small, quiet act of loyalty that told Ross exactly where his instincts lay, even if his bosses didn't yet. The footage was unambiguous. Ross and Minyu, cross-legged on the lawn at 2:44, building a small tower of stones, laughing, present, nowhere near the pantry. Someone used her card without her, Mr. Yoon said grimly, which means someone in this house had access to clone it. That's not outside work. That's inside. Kang Jam's face, for the first time since Ross had met him, showed something unguarded and raw, not suspicion, but shame, quick and sharp, at how quickly he'd been ready to believe the worst of the one person in his house who had proven without hesitation that she'd put herself between his son and danger. Ross, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded different than it had an hour ago. Don't! She held up a hand, not cruelly but firmly. Find out who did this. That matters more than an apology right now. Next 4 days moved like a held breath. Security tightened until the estate felt more like a fortress than a home. Kang Jam barely left Minyu's side, and when business forced him away, Ross noticed he texted Mr. Yoon for updates every 20 minutes, and increasingly, texted her 2 brief messages that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with a man checking, quietly, that she was still there. Minyu ate all his vegetables today. Historic, he wants you to teach him that Nigerian card game again. I don't understand the rules. I'm told that's the point. Ross found herself smiling at her phone more than she'd admit to anyone, and hated, a little, how much she looked forward to those small, ordinary messages from a man who terrified half the boardrooms in Seoul. The break in the case came from an unlikely place. Minyu, drawing quietly in the safe room one evening while Ross braided her hair back for the night, looked up from his crayons and said, with the casual devastation only a child could deliver, "Auntie Hannah was in the kitchen that day, before the juice. She told me not to tell Appa she visited." Ross went very still. Auntie Hannah, Kang Jam's cousin on his late mother's side, a fixture at family gatherings, a woman with unrestricted access to every wing of the estate, and Ross now remembered with a cold jolt, a standing grudge against Kang Jam for inheriting controlling shares of Kang Holdings that Hannah's branch of the family had long believed should have gone to her father. Ross brought it to Kang Jam that night, watching his face go through disbelief, denial, and finally a grim, exhausted acceptance that betrayal rarely announces itself with a villain's face. It usually wears the face of someone who's been at every birthday party for 30 years. "She was at the funeral," he said quietly, almost to himself. "She held Minyu at the funeral, Mr. Yoon's investigation, once redirected, moved fast. Hannah's financial records, quietly, legally, carefully subpoenaed through a family trust dispute Kang Jam's legal team had been sitting on for months, revealed staggering debts. A shadow company linked to a rival conglomerate hungry for Kang Holdings shipping contracts, and 3 wire transfers timed suspiciously close to each of the accidents that had driven away Minyu's previous 3 nannies. "She wasn't just trying to remove me," Kang Jam said, staring at the evidence spread across his desk at 1 a.m., voice hollow. "She was trying to remove Minyu. If something happened to him while I had no other heir, controlling interest reverts to the family trust, her father's branch." Ross's blood ran cold. "She's been planning this for years." "I let her hold my son at his mother's funeral," Kang Jam said, and for the first time since Ross had met him, his composure cracked entirely. Not into anger, but into grief, raw and unhidden for the family he'd trusted and the danger he hadn't seen circling his own child. Ross crossed the room without thinking and put her hand over his on the desk. He didn't pull away. "You see it now," she said quietly. "That's what matters. You're not the man who missed it. You're the man who's about to stop it." Confrontation, when it came 2 nights later, was almost anticlimactic in its coldness. Hannah arriving for what she believed was a routine family dinner, walking straight into a room with Kang Jam's lawyers, Mr. Yoon, and a folder of evidence thick enough to end not just her freedom but her entire branch of the family's standing. She didn't cry. She didn't deny it, not really. She simply looked at Kang Jam with decades of resentment finally unmasked and said, "You were always going to inherit everything. I was just trying to take back what should have been ours." "You tried to poison a 6-year-old, Kang Jam said, voice like frost over stone, "to take back a company. There is no version of that sentence I will ever forgive." Police were already waiting outside. It was over in under an hour, quieter, colder, and far less satisfying than Ross had expected, the way real danger so often resolves without the fireworks fiction promises. Afterward, the house exhaled. Security stood down from crisis footing to something closer to normal vigilance. Minyu finally told a version of events gentle enough for a child, cried, then asked if Auntie Hannah would still come to his birthday. And Kang Jam knelt and told him, with a tenderness Ross had rarely seen from him, that some people love us and hurt us at the same time, and it's never a child's job to fix that. Ross found Kang Jam alone afterward on the terrace, city lights spread gold and glittering beneath a clear Seoul sky. No rain, just cool evening air and the particular hush that follows survived danger. "You should be with Minyu," she said, joining him at the railing. "He's asleep." Finally. Kang Jam didn't look at her, but his shoulders had lost the rigid set she'd grown used to. "I keep thinking about what you said 3 months ago in that safe room. You were tired of men deciding what you wanted from them before you'd even opened your mouth. I remember. I did that to you." He turned then, and his eyes in the moonlight held none of the guarded distance she'd first met. "I decided who you were before I let you prove it, and you saved my son's life twice over, once from poison, and once from growing up in a house where the person protecting him best was treated like a suspect." "You were scared," Ross said softly. "Scared people make mistakes." "That's a kinder read than I deserve." A pause, and then quieter. "I don't know how to do this, whatever this is. I haven't let myself want anything since my wife died, and I certainly didn't plan on wanting my son's nanny of all impossible things." Ross's breath caught. "Kang Jam, I'm not asking you to say anything back," he said quickly, almost boyishly awkward in a way that didn't match his reputation at all. I just needed you to know that it's not your keycard I trust in this house. It's you. It's always been you, since the sound of that glass hitting the floor. Space between them had closed without either of them noticing. Close enough now that Ross could see the moonlight catching in his eyes. Close enough that the golden lights of Seoul blurred at the edges of her vision into something that felt, absurdly, like the beginning of a different kind of story than the one she'd walked into 3 months ago. I didn't take this job to fall for my employer, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't ask you to. His hand found hers on the railing, warm despite the cool air. I'm asking if you'd let yourself anyway, not because of what I have, because of who you've already shown me you are. Ross looked at him for a long moment, at the guarded, formidable man who had, piece by piece over 3 dangerous months, let her see beneath the armor to someone protective and grieving and quietly, fiercely devoted. And she made a choice that had nothing to do with his company or his fortune, and everything to do with the way he knelt to his son's eye level in every crisis, the way he'd said I'm sorry to a maid without a shred of pride standing in the way. She closed the distance and kissed him, soft, certain, lit gold by the city and silver by the moon. No rain, no storm, just clear skies finally settling over 2 people who had survived the worst and chosen, deliberately, to see what came next. When they broke apart, Kang Jam rested his forehead against hers, something that looked almost like relief breaking across his usually unreadable face. So, he said, voice rough with something unfamiliar and warm, does this mean I'm allowed to walk you to the pantry without security filing a report? Ross laughed, a real laugh, bright and unguarded, for the first time since the glass hit the floor. Let's start with breakfast, she said. We'll work up to the pantry. Inside, unseen by either of them, Minyu had crept to the window in his pajamas, watching his father laugh with the woman who'd saved his life, and smiled the wide, unguarded smile of a boy who understood, without needing the words explained, that his small, broken family had just quietly, imperfectly, begun to heal.